Good evening. My name is Leslie Dwyer. I'm Managing Director of Future Ag based in Athy, County Kildare. I'm here this evening to discuss strategies to improve soil health and production on organic grassland. I suppose the first thing we want to look at is look at soil health and maybe define soil health. Definition I use is coming from the USDA, and basically soil health by the USDA is defined as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. We often hear soil health in the context of its effect on plant health, its effect on animals, but we have to remember that soil health affects us, affects humans and human existence as much as it does plants and animals. There's three aspects of soil: the physical, chemical, and biological. It is often been referred to as a three-legged stool. The soil system is made up of those three elements. And to release the full potential of our soils, we have to focus and we have to optimize all three aspects. So we have to focus on the biology, we have to focus on the physical side as well as the chemical. We've been guilty in the past of mainly focusing on the chemical side from an NPK, pH point of view, and we've largely neglected the biological aspect of the soil and the influence that has on our soil health, as well as the physical. Each leg is influenced by the others. So what we do at a chemical level, the fertilizers, the manures, the farm manures we apply affects the biology in the soil positively or negatively in some cases. It can also, in fact, impact the physical nature of the soil in terms of compaction, etc. A strength in one leg can only partially compensate for a weakness in another. So even though you might have really strong chemical aspect in your soil in terms of high indexes for P's and K's, good pHs, etc., you can still have a soil that's weak at a physical level in terms of compaction, and that's biologically quite poor. And on the other side of that, you could have a very rich biological soil that's full of earthworm activity, that has lots of microbial activity, but is quite low in available P or available K, and is capable of production, but maybe at a lower level than what would be necessary for high stocking rates. So when we look at the physical aspect of the soil, really the first thing we need to do is when we dig into the soil is to smell it. How does it smell? And we all know the fresh earthy smell you get from digging into soil. It's built into our human DNA to attract us to that smell. And healthy soils that are physically quite strong, you will get that fresh earthy smell. And next thing, you look at the texture. What is the sand, silt, clay content in that soil? And obviously that will vary in a lot of cases from field to field, from farm to farm. And then we look at the structure and the aggregation of the soil, which I'll explain in the next slide. An undisturbed soil, or a soil that's physically quite strong, will have 25% pore space for water, 25% pore space for air, about 45% mineral matter, and 5% organic matter, although a lot of our grassland soils could be up to 10% organic matter. A soil that's compact will not have that pore space for air and for water, and it have significantly reduced capacity to store water and to store air, and so a larger portion of the soil composed of this mineral matter. And the difference that structure makes can be seen with this example here of 100 grams of water in ice cubes and 100 grams of liquid water. As we can see here, this 100 grams of ice cubes has lots of airspace in amongst the cubes itself, which is what we're looking for in a well-structured soil. But 100 grams of liquid water, there's no space for air. So the structure makes a big difference, even though the physical amount and the weight is the same. These photos are courtesy of SRUC in Scotland, and they give two very good examples of soils, one that's quite compact and one that's quite friable. So the picture here on the left-hand side is a soil that's quite compact in nature. You can see after it's dug out and it's broken up that the aggregates are quite large and they're quite angular. There's very little space in here for air, for water, for roots, for microbial life. Whereas if we look on this side, on the right-hand side, a soil that's soils that are friable in nature, you can see that they break up quite easily. Lots of roots, lots of activity there, loads of space for air, loads of space for water. Even though this one looks a more peatier soil, you can still see, even though it's a peatier soil, it is very well structured. Small aggregates, again, lots of roots able to penetrate through and access different levels in the soil profile. So there are two prime examples of a compact and friable soils. So in terms of, again, the physical aspect, the air that we breathe is 78% nitrogen, is 21% oxygen. Well-aerated soils, like we said before already, will have about 25% air, 25% water. So if we have 25% air and it's 78% nitrogen, our soil, if it's well structured, should have 20% nitrogen. And that nitrogen is there for very good reason, because biology can access that and make some of it available. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, do our soils have enough air? Is air lacking in our soils before we start looking at our N, our P, our K, etc.? Have we enough air? Microbes and biology in our soil need oxygen. So if we don't have enough air, and air is 21% oxygen, our soils could very well be deficient in oxygen. And the question I would ask each of you to think of and to look and see is, have your soils enough air? And are your soils deficient in oxygen? So we have to look and we have to assess what our soil structure is. And this is the VEST chart. And that helps us to do this. Developed by the SRUC, has been adapted or adopted by Tagus and changed somewhat. It's a chart that's available online. If you simply type in Tagus VEST or even grass VEST, you'll get it either off Tagus or off SRUC. And it's basically a way of going out. You get a spade, you dig into the soil, and you take up a block that's about a square foot. And then you go through a process of looking at the quality of the structure, the size and the appearance of the aggregates. Is there roots visible down through what you've dug out? Is it quite porous? Is there room there for water? Is there room there for air? After you break it up, how does it appear? Does it appear very angular? Does it break off in big blocks, or is it quite friable? And then you can basically score it on a score of 1 to 5. Typically, our soils are landing in here around this range. I have seen soils up at this range. That's when you have a bigger problem. Nothing that can't be remedied, but it's good to know where you're starting from, because this will dictate what kind of levels of production you have, and then what you need to do to hold or to improve that production. The physical structure of soil is influenced by a lot of factors. The main one in our country is actually rainfall. The sheer volume of rain that's falling in Ireland onto, in a lot of cases, low grass covers, a lot of it hitting soil. Rain patterns have changed, as we all know. We're getting less of the soft rain and more heavier sharp bursts of rain, which again is pounding the soil, and that does influence the structure, and that actually is a cause of compaction. Stocking rates on farm influence compaction structure. The calcium to magnesium ratios in our soils has a big influence also on structure. One of the big ones is our biological and our earthworm activity. And as we have, I suppose, changed our practices over the last 40, 50 years, biological and earthworm activity in our farms has dropped. And as a result, the structure has deteriorated. Species of plants grown, major influence on structure, which is very evident when a farm moved from maybe growing ryegrass to growing multi-species swarts. Multi-species swarts will turn structure around in a very short time span. I've seen structure improve in 6 to 12 months with multi-species, where monocultures or ryegrass, you struggle consistently to maintain it, but it can be done. So in terms of nutrients, what nutrients do our soils contain? And the good news is, whether you're organic or whether you're conventional going into organic, on average, our soils in Ireland, our long-term grassland soils, have a lot of nutrients stored in the soil. Per hectare, we have anything up to 7,000 kilos of nitrogen.
We have a minimum of 1,500 kilos on most farms across the country of phosphorus. Potash is on the lower end, but still we have about 2.5 ton of potash locked per hectare in our soils. Now, most of these are locked into the organic matter, but the good news is they can be unlocked. So on average, we have nutrients there. We just have to figure out how to make best use of them. Organic matter has a huge role in regulating our soils, and organic matter basically is made up of an accumulation over thousands of years of decaying roots, other herbage, organic materials deposited as farmyard manure or slurry. It's a huge important component of soil fertility because it regulates the availability of the major nutrients, your sulfur, for example, your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potash to a lower extent. A lot of trace minerals are locked up in our soil organic matter. Crucially, our soil organic matter contains that 7,000 tons of nitrogen per hectare. It's a lot of nitrogen. Only about 1 to 3% is available. Mostly 98% is locked up in a form that's not available for plant uptake. But 1% is 70 kilos per year, 3 is 210 kilos per year, which is a lot of nitrogen. The soil organic matter is constantly being turned over by earthworms, where you have them in insufficient numbers, and other soil microbes. This process of turning the soil over helps to release 1 to 3% of this locked up nitrogen in a process called mineralization and make it available for production. The background availability of nitrogen from our soils is average about 140 kilos per hectare per year, but the range is quite wide. The range is 74 kilos all the way up to 212, and these are figures from Tagus and from James Humphreys. That research was done back in the early 2000s. If anything, those figures have increased, not decreased in that time frame. So in terms of the background soil nitrogen availability, on average, we are up around that 140. Farms with very poor structure or poor soil type will be down here. Very well structured, highly biologically active soils. It's possible to get the background soil mineralization levels up over 200. On average over the year, this is the background levels of nitrogen that's released. So if we look here in February and March, we're releasing about 0.25 of a kilo of nitrogen per day. As the soil starts to heat up and microbial activity begins to increase, the levels increase up over half a kilo per day. They dip again in around June or July and increase again in late August going into September before they dip back down again. But in most cases, there's always some nitrogen being released. And once your soils aren't waterlogged, that's what's helping to sustain growth over our winters. But there's always nitrogen being released, no matter where you are. But your soil structure and your activity will determine how much of that is released throughout the year. I suppose people have often heard this before, but there's more microbes in 1 tablespoon of healthy soil than there are people on Earth. Soil is an incredible substance. And they're saying that one tablespoon can contain up to 7 billion soil microbes. I relate soil is very similar actually to an animal's rumen, to a cow's stomach, the main stomach. It's a digester that needs to be fed properly. Elaine Ingham in America has done phenomenal work in putting together the soil food web and understanding soil biology in the last 50 years. And she's the main driver behind coming up with the research and putting together, helping us understand what exactly is happening beneath our feet. And when we look at the soil structure, the soil food web, we're looking at all the different levels that are there. So on the first, what they call the first trophic level, we have basically what we call the photosynthesizers. So the plant roots and shoots, the organic matter that's basically taken in sunlight, taken in water, and converting carbon driving carbon into the soil, and all the residues that are building up as a result of that growth process. The second trophic level then are your basically your fungi, your nematodes, your bacteria. And these are getting fed by the plant roots. They're getting fed these carbon substances that are exudates coming from the plant roots, and they grow. And They get eaten by the third trophic level. So you have protozoa, your earthworms are getting fed. So basically, your fungi will feed the earthworms. Sorry. And your arthropods and your nematodes. So basically, there's a cycle here. These are feeding these guys here. When these die off, these are feeding the next level up, and then these feed the next level up, and on it goes. So without getting this right and getting these guys right, we're never going to feed the earthworms. And the earthworms are nature's natural plow. We got to get the basics right in terms of getting our biological activity correct. In terms of, if we look at an acre of healthy topsoil, on average, an acre of healthy topsoil will contain about 1/2 ton of earthworms, 1.25 tons of beneficial fungi, 750 kilos or 3/4 ton of bacteria, 65 kilos of protozoa, and 1/2 ton of arthropods and algae. So when you look at the livestock that's above the ground, in terms of you have a cow to the acre at 550 kilos, you have multiplications of that underground, or you should have, in terms of the soil microbes and the earthworms that are there. All these microbes equate really to billions of miniature bags of fertility, because all the funguses, all the bacteria, they're all moving nutrients, they're digesting nutrients, and they're basically making the nutrients that are unavailable, slowly available. They convert them into plant available forms over time. We have 25 earthworms per cubic foot, equals about 1 million earthworms per acre. Studies done in the UK, and there has been a lot of work done in the UK over the last, particularly probably 5 to 7 years on earthworms. Jackie Stroud has done phenomenal work on arable farms in the UK, and studies over there have shown that in healthy topsoil, 40 tons of castings per year pass through earthworms' bodies. Huge amount of activity where we have healthy soil, and they're estimated to consume 4 to 10% of the top 6 inches of the topsoil annually. So that equates to about 2 tons of dry matter, which it really is phenomenal work when you have earthworms working for your benefit. Their main functions: shred organic matter and to move it throughout the soil. They aerate and they aggregate soil particles. They increase and they disperse microbes and nutrients throughout the soil profile. A good benchmark is a healthy soil will have 20 earthworms per cubic foot. If it's less than 5, soil health is poor and needs to be addressed immediately. 3 main types of earthworms. So you have the epigeek, which are the primary decomposers that will mainly live near the top of the soil surface. We have the endogeek, which are secondary decomposers. They live further down, but they live in temporary horizontal burrows. And then we have the anesic, which are the main earthworms we all know, which are the deep burrowers. They live in permanent vertical burrows. They are extremely important for soil aeration and warm water movement. These guys, once you kill them off, they take years to recover. These guys here can recover in months. That's why ploughing, etc., is extremely detrimental, because it kills off large numbers of these. And we really need to look at what practices we're implementing at farm level so we protect our earthworm numbers. Worm casts on average, when you test their worm casts, they can be 50% higher in organic matter, and they unlock chemical bonds to make nutrients more available to plants. I've actually tested earthworm castings on farms. I haven't got figures near these, more towards the lower end. You can get up to 2 to 7 times more available phosphorus than in the surrounding soil. I found up to twice the level, 2 to 10 times the level of potash. Again, we have found the lower level in Irish conditions, 5 times the level of nitrogen, 3 times more magnesium, 1.5 times available calcium. Worms have a gland in their neck, and as they're eating through the soil, they actually secrete calcium into the soil to neutralize the pH and put the calcium levels up. They can eat their own weight per day. They can survive at a low pH down to 5.5, but crucially, they thrive at a pH of 6.5 to 7. And that's another reason why soil pH and liming is important. This is a picture of earthworm castings from a conventional dairy farm I work with quite closely. And we started working on soil health back in 2015, and has seen dramatic improvements in soil health and reduced fertilizer use over that time. This was in January 2020. Actually, I took these photographs. Massive earthworm activity over the winter. Huge earthcast or wormcast production. This typically what he would see in his farm, because he doesn't have dung beetles. I don't talk about dung beetles today, but they're something that need to be looked at as well. But on his farm, the earthworm activity is such that all dung pats are digested within 7 weeks, 2 rotations roughly on his farm. He doesn't have dung beetles to do the job, but the worms seem to have taken over. So the main group of soil microbes. Soil microbes there's many different species. Algae, viruses are a huge part of and a very important part, believe it or not, of soil health. Bacteria and archaea, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, arthropods, gastropods, and earthworms. I often get asked, particularly by researchers, where's the science? Where's the science to show that microbes are important? You can see here just 3 studies I referenced just in terms of how important microbes are to stabilization of aggregates in the soil, to fix the nitrogen from the air, how important they are to stabilize soil structure, and etc. So there is some of this work is going back to 1981, 1993, 2000. There is a lot of work done over time if you dig it to show the importance of microbes and how they affect the soil structure. Why are microbes important? Basically, similar enough to earthworms, they digest and recycle organic matter. They improve soil structure for the simple reason they create space for air and water. If you go back to one of those very first slides I put up, 25% air, 25% water. That's what we need. We need that pore space. Microbes help to improve the structure so that pore space is created. They recycle and they make nutrients available to plants. If we have 1,500 kilos of phosphorus, but you only need 30, 40 kilos a year, microbes can help to make that available. They increase the water holding and the nutrient holding capacity. If you have a soil that's lacking in biological activity, that is not held together nicely in that nice soil structure, nutrients, be it from slurry or be it from farmer manure, will leach much more easily. Crucially, they produce byproducts that will increase plant growth naturally without added fertilizers. They protect plants from disease. I think the figure is only 2 to 3% of fungi in the soil are pathogenic, the rest are beneficial. And they crucially sequester carbon. They will produce organic acids, so they can actually regulate soil pH along the length of the plant root. They produce enzymes that break down substances like cellulose in straw, etc., that's plowed back into soil or that's mixed back into soil or and plant roots. They produce plant growth hormones and secondary metabolites. These are powerful compounds, and we've seen this time after time again on farms we work with, where we can increase tillering in crops and in grasses just with simple microbial stimulants and increase growth rates. Only 5%, they reckon, maybe even lower, of total soil biology has been studied. The group of long-chain bacteria that produce about 80% of medical antibiotics are called actinobacteria. Streptomyces, for example, makes streptomycin and can sometimes be seen naked with the naked eye in healthy soil. Sometimes we confuse this as being a fungi, but this is actually bacteria that produces strands. These actinobacteria produce the distinct smell of soil. It's a compound called geosmin, which translates from into odor of the soil. It's the Latin term geosmin. It's odor of the soil. People, some people say they have gardeners often say that they had a great day in the garden. They feel so much better after a day gardening and or even working in the field. And there's a very possible good reason for that, because humans have an affinity with soil, and the reason being is we can pick up geosmin at 5 parts per trillion in the soil. Sharks, for example, can smell blood at 1 part per million. So humans are 200 times more sensitive to geosmin than sharks are to blood. And the question might be, well, why? Actinobacteria are now being linked to reduction in stress and post-traumatic stress disorder in humans, and actually being looked at as a treatment potentially for PTSD and anti-stress. It's a very, very powerful compound, very powerful beneficial compound. And again, it goes back to getting back to nature and working with soil, helps to clear the head. And there's a good scientific reason now. It's understood why. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of boho up in Fermanagh. This guy up here is a guy called Dr. Jerry Quinn. He's a researcher in the Northern Ireland that is looking for new strains of bacteria to produce antibiotics to get over the problems that we have with MRSA. He's traveled all over the world to the most harsh places, including the Gobi Desert, Sahara Desert, into Antarctica, into the Arctic, looking for bacteria that nobody has found before, because these bacteria in harsh conditions often produce natural antibiotics that we can use in human medicine. He had heard for years about this old wives' tale, it was called, in Fermanagh, where if you had an illness going back anything they reckon from 400 to 4,000 years ago, you traveled to Boho, you got a fist of soil from this church and graveyard in Boho, you made a poultice. If you had a toothache, you kept the poultice beside your toothache. If you were very sick, you might wrap it and put it under your straw mattress or whatever you were sleeping at the time. And people got relief from it, people got cured from it, and people traveled from all over Northern Ireland to to Boho basically to get the cure. But crucially, the old wives' tale was you always had to return the soil. You could never keep the soil in the house or on your person for more than 10 to 14 days. If you did, it would make you sick. Jerry Quinn had heard of this old wives' tale. He eventually traveled down there with a team. They took samples of soil in very, well, basically they had to dig samples and cryogenically freeze them and bring them back to controlled laboratories where they can examine them. They found one particular bacteria that produced something like 10 to 20 antibiotics. And when they looked further, they have found, they reckon, anything up to 10 microbes that can produce anything between 100 to 200 new antibiotics. So the old wives' tale was correct. They have unique biology and microbes in Boho, but crucially, what they also found was very high radon levels. So if you don't bring the soil back, the radon will eventually make you sick. So the old wives were correct. In terms of root exudates, which I referenced later, the plant-soil interaction. This is, again, something that we weren't taught when we were studying our soil sciences. Everything was, a lot of it revolved around NPK, and we weren't taught about this interaction that roots have with microbes and have with the soils. And the rhizosphere basically in plants comprises a millimeter thin soil layer around the soil roots. And around these roots, we have very high concentrations of what we call organic exudates, which is basically what the roots are exuding out, mainly carbon compounds. And these basically are feeding the bacteria and the other microbes, but also it's the zone within which microbes can get back into the plant with nutrients. There's a huge exchange process going on there. Root exudates feed the biology. And the more diverse plant types you have, the more diverse root exudates that are secreted, and then the more diverse portfolio of microbes that are fed. So the soil biology, the root exudates feed the biology in turn feed the plant with vital nutrients. So they're living together in harmony. Each plant has its own specific range of exudates, which feeds a specific range of biology in the soil. So ryegrass will feed a very narrow band. You take a multi-species with 5, 6, 7, 8 different types of plants, herbs, legumes, grasses, etc. They will feed a much broader range of biology and microbes. The larger the root mass, the larger the area that can be accessed and fed. And this is a picture I took from an organic farm in North Kildare a couple of years ago. And you can see here the rhizosphere, the soil clinging onto the outside of that root structure, and very, very healthy sign, a very, very good sign. The exudates coming out, the microbes being attracted in and structuring that soil, a very, very well structured soil. So the exudates can regulate, and the biology can regulate the soil pH around the root zone. Exudates can be quite acidic or alkaline, depending on what nutrients are needed at the time. This is a very well-known picture from Cotswold Seed catalog. It's basically a diagram representing the root structure of a lot of our common our grasses, herbs and legumes. If we look over here, we have our typical ryegrass, hybrid ryegrass, and Italian ryegrass with a very shallow, a very narrow root structure. Then we look at our cocksfoot, which has a very deep root structure, chicory going all the way down to 150 centimeters, 5 foot. Ridgrass, again, a huge tap root with hairy roots off the side, again going down to very deep, a great depth. Clover, quite broad root structure for the white clover, and the red clover with a bigger tap root, and again putting down a deeper root profile. So a big difference between these herbs and legumes versus our ryegrasses. And basically what's happening, if you think about the root exudates I just referred to, so the ryegrass is only really feeding a very narrow band of microbes around its root structure. And then the chicories, the plantains, the clover are feeding a huge range of microbes to a great depth. And like I referenced from Elaine Ingham's Soil Food Web, when you feed the microbes, the earthworms get fed. When earthworms get fed, they reproduce. That's why we often see a massive transformation very quickly in multi-species swards in the soils. Earthworm numbers, earthworms actually travel towards these zones, and they feed off the species that are there, and they reproduce, and earthworm numbers grow dramatically in those swarts. The effects of poor soil health. So the downsides is soil health is poor. Really, we have poor water infiltration. So water, rain sitting on the soil cannot drain quickly. The other side of that then is in a dry time, when you have poor soil health and poor soil structure, water cannot travel up. So we have poor capillarity. So that's the ability of water to move upwards in a time of drought. And if soil is structured poorly, that is less likely to happen. We have surface flooding, we have ponding, we have lower response to chemical fertilizer. I should have actually changed that. That should say slurries, manures, and organic fertilizers. The same thing applies. When structure is poor, soil health is poor, the response to what you put on, slurry particularly, is lower. Less palatable grass, lower mineral content in our grasses, in our cereals, and we end up with excess iron and antagonists. Basically, when water drains through our soil profile, iron is one of the most abundant minerals in our soil, and our iron gets oxidized. But when water drains, water pulls the iron with it down into the subsoil. Now, if your water is not draining through your soil, you are relying really on water to evaporate. But if it evaporates, it leaves the iron behind it, and it leaves other antagonists behind it. And that's why in poor soils, you will see iron building up, and you actually see iron pockets building up in soil. The other effect is you get less mineralization or release of those nutrients that I talked about. So the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potash, the sulfur, trace minerals, etc., they're not as available, and so production will suffer. So the next step is basically, what do we do? What are the practical steps to improve soil health? First thing we got to do is assess where we are. So I urge everyone to get out the spade, go and dig, get the GrassFest chart, bring it with you, laminate it, put it on your phone, do what you have to do, but go out and identify if there is compaction in your fields. Is it in the main root mass at the top 3 to 4 inches, or is it deeper down? And put a plan in place. If your soils do score 4 or 5, you may have to go in with the likes of a pan buster here to alleviate that compaction. And and basically kickstart the process. You could do it without it, but it'll be much, much slower. I believe even some farmers have found compaction levels were so high in their farms that they had to use the likes of a pan buster even before putting multi-species in, because even the multi-species were having difficulty with the level of compaction that was there. So it's important to identify where you're at before you jump in. The likes of this machine here then is used to alleviate compaction in the main root mass, provided there's no compaction deeper down. This is just some pictures I was sent on there a few years ago by the distributor for this machine, the Pan Buster. He went to do a demo on a farm, a quite heavy farm, a couple of years ago, and it was quite wet when he got there. He didn't want to actually do the demo because it's less than ideal conditions, but he went ahead and did a few runs in the field anyway. And as you can see, there was a lot of it was quite damp. You can see the earth built up on the tines itself. And this is the result a couple of weeks later. No extra nitrogen, no extra phosphorus or potash. This is literally you're adding air. And so where he pan busted, you see the flush of growth is coming from increased air in the soil and increased aerobic activity. That is the importance of having air and well-structured soils. In terms of other steps you can look at, we have quite a few farmers now gone back to using springtime harrows and using springtime harrows to rejuvenate pastures, take out old dead grasses, and in a lot of cases to basically release some nitrogen. So on average, a run of a good springtime harrow, once soil temperatures are up 8 to 10 degrees, will release on average about 10 to 15 kilos per hectare. And that's the equivalent of about half the bag of can per acre. That can be done once or twice a year. It's quite common in the UK on grassland farms for a springtime harrow to go across grass in the springtime. Many of them use it as a method of controlling chickweed in silage fields, because they, in a lot of cases, intensive dairy farms now are finding the herbicides aren't taking care of the chickweed anymore. And there's a good reason for that, and it's too much nitrogen. But the springtime harrow will lift the chickweed out of it. The springtime harrow basically stimulates, you're basically tickling the top layer of the soil. It's giving it a gentle aeration, it's stimulating nitrogen mineralization because it's stimulating the bacteria at the top of the soil. So it's a good way of just kickstarting growth and taking care of old dead grasses, which will be recycled back in, feeding the earthworms, etc. Generally, we would do that in kind of late March, early April, depending on what part of the country you're in, once soil temperatures are up over 8 degrees. And we might hit that again in July or August, provided the ground isn't too dry and there's enough moisture there for plant growth. Next step we have taken, I've been working on this since 2013, is I advocate all my customers, whether they are organic or conventional, that they test every couple of years their slurry and they apply biologically treated or aerated slurry and farm urban manure in small amounts. Because if you remember earlier on, I referred to that the soil is like a cow's rumen and a cow's stomach. Soil needs time to digest and assimilate nutrients. Now, this mightn't apply totally to organic, long-term organic farms, but typically what we're finding on conventional farms is, on average, for nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, and sulfur, we can have anything up to 62.5 units of total nutrients per 1,000 gallons. If you're going out with 3, 4, 5,000 gallons of that, you're putting out 200-300 units of nutrients at one time. That's and that's just the NPK and the sulfur. Soils can't handle that; they can't assimilate that. Slurry farmer manures are vital in organic. I don't need to tell any of you guys that, they're vital in organic context. Nutrients are very, very valuable. and even if it comes to watering the slurry down, which we had guys doing last year in conventional farms to extend it, it's something that should be looked at, because the benefits of slurry over the bag fertilizer, once it's biologically treated over time, that will help to restore your soil health. The availability of nutrients obviously depends on weather conditions at the time, method of application, soil pH and soil health has a big influence on the availability of these nutrients. But on average, that's what we're applying. With nitrogen, you can have 40 to 50% available, particularly now if you're using some of the less equipment. Phosphorus, about 50% will be available. Potash is 90% available. Potash is recycled very well in slurry and farmyard manure, and the sulfur is about half is available what's going out. So still on 1,000 gallons for what's available there, you're talking what's there, that's 36, 30, about 40 units available, which is a huge amount of nutrients per slurry. Potash is the one we have to watch in an Irish context, because we don't have huge reserves of it. In a dry year, it gets locked in very tight. So potash in our slurries and our farmer manures is very valuable. This is a picture of a slurry store, one of the very first, if not the first slurry store we treated back in 2012. You can see the bubbling here. That's basically aerobic activity in the tank. And what we're looking to do is restore, because our soil needs oxygen and our soil needs aerobic activity. We don't want to be putting slurry on that's dead, that's putrid. We need slurry that's aerobically active. So when it goes on the soil, you're not just putting on nutrients, you're also feeding the biology in the soil. That's what we do with our slurry treatment. We feed the soil biology. This is a picture of a farm in Cork last week. He's with me about 5 years. His slurry tank, you can see all the little bubbles here, and basically that's all aerobic microbes that are breathing in the slurry tank, minimizing agitation, and once that's applied onto the soil, that will help feed the microbes on that farm. The other thing to be mindful of outside of the NPK value is the carbon value in our slurries, our farmer manures, our compost is of huge value and huge benefit to our soils, to our soil health. And this is a figure from or a graph from PJ Forestell from Teagasc in Johnstown Castle. If we look at the amount of NP and K and other nutrients that's in our slurries versus the carbon content, the carbon is by far the biggest substance. And as far as I'm concerned, the X factor in slurries and manures, that bag fertilizer, etc., will never replicate. That's what's given us the kick from these sources that we won't get from bag fertilizer. That carbon is used by bacteria, it's used by funguses to grow and to help maintain our soil health. In terms of farmyard manures, on average, this will vary, but on average, our farmyard manures will have about 3 units of available nitrogen, 2 of P and 12 of K per ton. Our forefathers composted it. They probably didn't understand why, but they knew it was important. In a lot of cases, fresh dung, fresh farmer manure has quite high salt levels. So yes, you will get high nutrient levels, but the salt will actually damage the soil microbes. So they field composted it for a couple of years before they spread it. And they understood that composting it over time was better for their soils. They saw it with their own eyes. We know now why. It's to get the salt levels down and not just provide a nutrient source, but also to feed the microbes. If it is in short supply, we try to get farmers to target the headlands or target compact areas where there's high traffic or there's low organic matter even in fields, and basically feed the earthworms with it. Rather than trying to put out too little across too broad an area. We do that more so on conventional farms and organic farms, and it works quite well. But farmyard manure, even composted for 6 months before after the spring and before the close period in September, October, composting for 6 months in the field has a huge impact on its ability to improve soil health. Soil pH, you're probably all sick of hearing it over the years, but I'm going to repeat it because it's bloody important. Soil pH, basically pH stands for the power of hydrogen. And it's pH really is a measure. We know it measures acidity and alkalinity, but really what it measures is the amount of hydrogen ions in the soil. And as the amount of hydrogen ions increase, the pH decreases. Now, plant growth by its very nature increases hydrogen ions in the soil. So plant growth without the use of any fertilizers will naturally drive the pH down, albeit slowly, but it does happen. pH is what they call a log scale. So basically a pH of 5.5 is 10 times more acidic than a pH of 6.5. I missed that one in college. I must have missed the lecture that day, as well as many others. But when you realize, and many people don't, what that pH scale is, the difference between 6.5 and 6 is huge. 6.5 and 5.5 is literally like a human being being asked to go into a room that's 10 degrees and all of a sudden it's driven down to 100. Living microbes and earthworms don't do well at a low pH because the acidity levels around them, around our bodies, is so high, all they can do is survive. They will not thrive, they will not reproduce. So pH has a dramatic effect on soil health because of the effect it has on our soil microbes. It has a huge, from a slurry in a farm manure context, it has a huge impact on the availability of nutrients. If you look at this graph here in terms of soil nitrogen at pH, you have about 80% availability. You go up to 6.5, you're getting close to that 100% availability. So even what you're putting on with your slurry and your farm manures, low pH soils on average will have lower availability of nutrients applied. It also has a dramatic effect on roots and root structure. Again, because of that acidity level, they're literally burning the root tips. The root tips cannot penetrate through very low pH soils. Maybe certain species that tolerate acidity can, but on average, or ryegrasses, etc., can't. Because of the sheer volume of acidity that's there. So the pH affects the availability of nutrients. It disrupts the root growth of plants, thereby reducing the transport of nutrients from the soil to the plant. You get much less microbial activity in the soil, particularly with earthworms. 17 essential plant nutrients are obtained from the soil. If your root structure isn't, or your roots aren't there and your activity in there, those nutrients aren't being brought up into the plant. Most of these nutrients they're required for healthy plant growth, but they can dissolve easily when the pH is in that range of 6 to 7.5. So down here, the microbes aren't going to be able to access them, whereas up here they are. And from an environmental aspect, less nutrients also are leached to groundwater. Sulfur, even though organics, sulfur is still important. Sulfur is an essential plant nutrient. It's a building block for protein synthesis in plants. So it helps plants to basically produce protein from the nitrogen that's fixed, be that freely in grasses from the soil or through the roots and legumes. They need sulfur to produce. It leaches easily with high rainfall. That's the one thing we have to be aware here. With our high rainfall, sulfur leaches very easily from our soils. Legumes that produce nodulated legumes that produce their own nitrogen, clover, etc., have a high sulfur demand. And there is a direct correlation between the sulfur availability and their ability to fix nitrogen. If they're lacking sulfur, they will not be able to fix nitrogen to the level that they could and should. Our sandier, well-textured, well-drained soils might give a higher response to a sulfur application, basically because those soils will leach sulfur easily in the first place. Heavier, high clay, peatier soils will hold that sulfur much better, higher organic matter, etc. So you might get a response to sulfur, but maybe not as much as you would in a sandy or well-drained soil. Sources for organic include organic elemental sulfur, sulfate of potash. We've used that on quite a few farms where soil tests have shown that the potash and the sulfur were limiting. and in multi-species swards, the improvement in production was dramatic. Epsom salts from an improved source where magnesium is limiting in the soil will also help to improve sulfur and magnesium levels. Feed your soil microbes. Yeah, many of you might have heard this before, some haven't. This is what we need to do to improve our soil health. First step is ensure the land is limed where necessary. Without the correct pH, our microbes, we can feed them all we want, we'll get a response, but we won't get the response that we need. The food sources we need to start with basically are carbon. We need aerobically treated farmyard manure and slurry. That's where we need to start on all our farms that do house cattle and animals over the winter. Aerobically treat it and make best use of it. Next in line would be organic humates, organic molasses, organic sugar. Basically, these will feed the microbes. They'll provide a food source. Most of those there, the humates and the molasses particularly, have carbon as well as sugar in the case of the molasses. They feed different profiles, but at the right rate, sprayed at the right time, they can help the microbe levels to increase. Raw organic milk. The milk has to be organic in an organic context, and it has to be raw from the tank. 10 litres to the acre diluted with water. This is a picture here, albeit on a conventional dairy farm, but just for context. Last year, that field got chemical nitrogen on the 7th of April. This was a picture taken on the 19th of May, 20 days after the previous grazing, when he applied milk and milk alone. The response was dramatic in terms of production and not unusual, and a response I've seen quite often around the country. It's not always what we're looking for. It's either been a benefit, a side benefit, but the main thing we're looking to do is actually improve the soil structure when we're putting these ingredients on. Just to be aware, milk is a pollutant if it hits water courses, etc. But when it's applied at this level of 10 litres per acre, it only has a BOD, a biological oxygen demand of 1% of what slurry would be given at 3,000 gallons to the acre, but it still needs to be handled and sprayed with care. This whole process of looking at milk originally came from actually a US farmer, and there's a link up top if you want to take a screen grab or make a note of that. That research is available online, and basically came from a guy that left industry and bought a farm, and decided that the US farmers didn't know how to make money and the Irish farmers were better at it. So he actually set up a pasture-based system and was making yogurts on farm and selling them locally. He had too much milk in one particular occasion to make yogurt, and had no one collecting it from the dairies. So he land spread it, and 6 months later, driving through his fields, he saw this rich green patch of pasture and wondered what it was, and went home and got his spade and he dug. And what he found was basically the soil structure had transformed in that 6 months. So he started doing more of it. Eventually, a soil scientist in Nebraska, University of Nebraska, found out about it, and they ran some trials. And long story short, what they found was 10 litres of milk applied basically increased the porosity of the soil by 50%. And the porosities, the pore space that I talked about earlier on, in between the mineral particles and the organic matter, that creates space for water and air. And the pore space contains and controls most of the functions of soil. So putting on something as simple as this can have a dramatic effect in a relatively short period of time. We've seen it here in Ireland in a year and a half, in terms of improving the soil structure, where you have already identified the soil structure as a problem. Yes, you can get an improvement in grass growth. It doesn't always happen, but the improvement in structure I've seen has resulted in paddocks that were treated withstanding the drought much longer in 2018. And again in 2022, the dry time, those paddocks that got milk, better soil structure, better root structure, and they can access water that other fields beside them couldn't. Other options to look at: organic seaweed extracts. These are products that we supply ourselves, well known for thousands and thousands of years. I suppose we take a somewhat more scientific approach to it now, in that we extract the goods that we know can stimulate growth, and we extract biologically active compounds. Applying seaweed stimulates the plant to actually produce its own natural growth hormones, and growth hormones that are extremely effective in very small amounts to naturally drive production on that little bit. Enhanced root system, where seaweed is used at the right rate and used quite often, it would basically drive your root structure and help to improve. Again, you drive your root structure, you improve your soil health, and it does help to mitigate against droughts. Grasses will hold on for longer in a dry time, and they will recover quicker. Yeah, so further steps to improve soil health. There's more and more happening now with bacterial inoculants. These are a mix of nitrogen fixing, phosphate releasing, potash releasing bacteria, and beneficial soil funguses. And you'll see more and more of these coming to the market over the next number of years. We've been working with these for quite a few years. We found ones that work, we found ones that don't. And it's important to know which is which. And they basically work by supporting plant growth by releasing or fixing in P and K in the soil. So that P and K I talked about earlier, we can supplement bacteria while you're improving your own soil health, to basically help release some of those nutrients. By their very nature, they will improve soil structure, which will help to reduce compaction in the long term when they're used year after year, and they do increase the bioavailability or the release of nutrients. They will help as part of a program to restore soil biology, restore balanced soil biology, but also to break down plant residues. We have identified certain funguses from the soil. Trichoderma is one of them that I use in one of my mixes, basically that will help to break down that straw and ensure that it's not being plowed back up in an arable situation. And even in a grassland scenario where grass is where you have a thick thatch grown in all pastures, you want to drill back into it, grass into grass, and we can apply certain inoculants that will help to break down that thatch and to basically improve the structure and get the new sward off to a better start. Most of these inoculants can be applied through a sprayer, obviously on an organic farm through your own sprayer, or they can be mixed through slurry and farmyard manure. That's another way of getting them out simply. The important thing with these is when you have to know when to use them. Soil pH again has a big bearing on how effective they are. Very low pHs, you're going to get a low response. You'll get a response, but it's going to be low. Soil temperatures, you have to wait until soil temperatures are rising 6.5 degrees and above. And do not put them on obviously waterlogged soils. Soil structure, if you have soils that are very well structured, they will work quite dramatically, quite quickly. If your soils are poorly structured, it will take longer for them to work. So again, it's about knowing when to use them and what to expect. So in summary, basically, we need to consider the three legs of soil health: the physical, the chemical, the biological aspects. We have, luckily, tons of nutrient reserves in our soil. Biology and worms can help you unlock those. Biology plays a key role in soil health, in soil structure and creating pore space for that crucial air and water. If we improve soil health, we can release the full potential of our soils, be that in organic or conventional farms. It's crucial that we know where to start, and assessing our soil is our starting point, and identifying potential issues, whether being the root mass or deeper down. If we need to feed our soil biology, and we have to ensure our soils can breathe. Air is crucial. Oxygen is a crucial element in our soils. I would urge everybody to at least every couple of years test slurries and see what the levels of NPK are. and make sure that your levels are not dropping over time. Aerobically treat it and apply appropriate amounts of healthy aerobic soils. When I'm saying healthy amounts, I generally try to get guys to apply 2,000 gallons to the acre, less if possible. Soil pH is crucial to optimize soil health. I'm not going to get into the whole calcium magnesium debate or points tonight, because there's so much I could be covering, but soil pH and liming soils is, if soil pHs are low, you'll never get to where you need to be. In a broad acres, you can get there. There is other ways to increase soil health with biologically, but in a large farm, it's very difficult to do without liming. Feed the soil microbes, develop a strategy to, and that's something we work on with farms, help them to develop strategies to feed the microbes. And in the conversion period, there is a range of natural stimulants and inoculants that we use to support growth while farms are transitioning in a conventional sense from higher or medium levels of fertilizer to lower levels in an organic context, to transition from conventional to organic, and to help maintain production. Just the company itself, my company is called Future Ag. We're based here in Athy. I'm working in agriculture since 1996, 97. I worked for 16 years in soil nutrition. I actually was dealing with farmers back 25 years ago on soils, but unfortunately not enough were listening at the time. So I diversified into animal nutrition, and but always maintained an interest in soil health, and came back around to it again in 2013 and went full-time in 2015. So we have a fair level of experience built up in terms of what works in an Irish context. And it's all about basically getting the biological health of our soils, our plants, our animals up at optimum levels. And we can be contacted on, that's my mobile or email address. We have a website, www.futureag.ie, and you're more than welcome now to ask any questions or anything that's on your mind. So thank you very much. And there was a question asked there, how often would you go with a milk application over a year? Very good question. Generally, guys that did it for a soil structure, we actually only went once. We went with an application of 10 litres to the acre, and they went once a year. It doesn't seem to matter whether it's a foliar application, so applied onto the leaf, or applied straight onto the soil after grazing. But what we've done to date is once. I know farmers that have actually applied it more often, but at a lower rate. So I met one farmer last week that actually is applying, he's a conventional farmer, and he is applying milk at 2.5 litres to the acre every 30 days as part of a rotation. I'd love to see research done on it, because I think it's something that could be quite useful. Soil compaction is the biggest issue I see out at on our grassland farms, organic and conventional. And if something as simple as a few applications of milk over a year can help, it's a quite easy fix, because again, 10 litres of milk, even in an organic context, I'm not quite sure the organic price, if it's €1 a litre, or we even want 20 litres, €12 an acre a year, for what it does for soil is well worth it.
Hi Leslie, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little there about can you talk a little about your foliar feed system that you're doing with farmers?
I can. Is it applicable, Fergal? Are most people here organic, or?
I'd say there's a mixture, Leslie.
Okay. So basically, what we're doing on the conventional farms, we're I've worked on this. Actually, sorry, there's a question. There is, the organic milk has to be unpasteurized. The organic milk has to be raw. Does it have to be unpasteurized? Pasteurization. If we think of milk, sorry, Fergal, I'll come back to that. If we think of milk, we believe some of the reason that the milk is so effective, and that research in America was done on raw milk. That's why we're sticking with raw milk. We know there is an effect from other milk products, because some of my colleagues in New Zealand that are foliar feeding do use milk powders, and milk powder has been referenced before. If you look at raw milk, you've got milk protein, you've got milk fat, which are very beneficial for fungi in the soil. We have the lactose in the milk, which is a sugar source, which is beneficial for the fungi. We have B vitamins. B vitamins get destroyed in the pasteurization process, but the B vitamins in unpasteurized milk, in raw milk, it's been explained to me is that they're a little bit like Red Bull for bacteria, in that they basically they grow rapidly when they get access to B vitamins. So that's the reason we stipulate raw milk. You will still get a response from applying on pasteurized milk. You will still get a response from applying milk powders. Is it as good as raw milk? I'd be straight with you. We don't know, because we haven't done any research on it. I have a feeling not quite as good, but still very good. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah.
So Fergal, in terms of the foliar feeding, basically what we're doing there is I'm importing machines out of New Zealand, and I work with other farmers around the country that are melting down their own fertilizer. We're dissolving, or we're solubilizing a range of fertilizers, predominantly urea, sulfate of ammonia, and we're spraying them onto the leaf of plants. And the leaf is taking up a majority of the nutrients through the leaf surface. And that enables us to cut the rates 40%. We are adding other ingredients in with that. So we're adding in the likes of molasses, humates, seaweeds, trace minerals, again, to feed the soil, to feed the biology in the soil. So what we're seeing over time is by taking that nitrogen in conventional farms off the soil and putting it through the leaf, the biology in the soil can recover much, much quicker. And we're seeing big improvements in soil structure. We're seeing big drops in fertilizer use, anything up to 70% on some farms. There are now 3 and 4 years foliar feeding. And we're seeing healthier stock, I would say. Dungs are better with dairy cows. The dungs are more solid, less loose dung, and we're getting better graze outs. So it's a system that we think is going to get quite popular. It's going to grow. It's a there are new practices. There's a bit of learning at the start, but actually once you get into it and you get your head around it, it's not that complicated. But on typically, if a farmer's applying a bag of cans, say even 30 units to the acre, we cut that back 40% in the first year, and then we might cut another 10% the year after, and 10% the year after that, once they add in the additives to help improve the soil biology.
Hi Leslie, how are you going? It's Kevin O'Hanlon
Hey
here.
Kevin, how are you?
Not too bad. Two quick questions. I can't fully remember the second one now because I was listening to you. But the first one, with the application of milk, could you put that through the slurry tanker? If you're putting out 1,500 gallons, could you let it into the tanker and then suck up your load? It's only watery slurries. Now it's not.
Yeah.
We only ever spread a watery slurry.
Good
and
question.
the second one, how long after can you let the cows into the field? Sorry.
Yeah. Again, Kevin, we know what works. So we know what the research done in America. We know what's worked here for us so far, and it was all put on a sprayer. If there's a possibility that yes, it could, but really what we need is a few brave souls to try it side by side.
Right. Give me a month.
We don't know. So there is a possibility when you're applying slurry. You could get mixed results depending on the ground conditions at the time. So if your soils are well structured, they're free draining, and there's plenty of air and water there, and you're putting on a low rate of watery slurry, and you put the milk with it, you could get a very, very good response, because the slurry will get down and it'll get assimilated, and the milk with it. But if you're going on with soils that are damper or wetter, I would think the benefits of the milk would get lost in that scenario. But it would be, a lot of it would be depending on the ground conditions at the time. There's a possibility, yes, it would, but we haven't tried it yet.
Right, we'll give it a go.
Good man, no better buckle. What was the second question?
How long after applying could you graze?
I would say I would think myself, Kevin, really there should be no like if you apply any foliar onto grass, for example, onto decent leaf cover, any nutrients that are there, the vast majority are absorbed within 6 hours. I wouldn't think there's any problem with going out grazing that grass relatively quickly. I'm talking days. Really, it's going to get assimilated pretty quickly. I would like, ideally, what I would prefer is actually to put it in straight after put it in pretty quickly after grass is grazed. So maybe if you're on a rotation of say 25 days, do the first third of that rotation with milk, and then you have 2 weeks for it a lot of it's getting to the soil, whatever's getting onto the leaf is getting assimilated in and getting time to get assimilated in. But in most cases, what's applied onto the leaf is assimilated into the plant pretty quickly. To be safe, probably give it a week. And that's just to get the benefit out of it. It's not that it's going to do anything harmful, but it's to get the benefit out of it. But it's best to be safe and then put it onto lower covers.
No bother. Thanks very much.
No bother, Kevin. Are you okay with that? Do you want any more information on the foliar side, Fergal, or what's your thoughts?
No, that's good. It's just maybe one more question, and I don't know, was it yourself or who was talking to me about this before? Down to if you're spraying on either a biological or foliar feeding, particularly a biological, do you have to, the pressure, is it critical? So again, like the guys putting out the milk,
yeah,
I thought I don't know, was it yourself, but I had this in the head that it has to be around under 1 bar pressure, because obviously your nozzle and your valve control the pressure. A lot of sprayers would be set up at 2.5 maybe bar. Yeah. I have a feeling somewhere the pressure, if you go too high to 1.5 bar over, you kill all your biology basically again. Yeah. Am I right in that?
So basically, the way that works is, so you take the likes of your milk, and your non-active ingredients. So your milk, your seaweed, your molasses, your humates, sugars, etc., that don't contain biology. The likes of them are perfectly fine going out at higher pressures. So basically, whatever the sprayer is set at, leave it at it. The biologicals, different companies have different mixes. The mixes we select and the companies I work with have a lot of experience in this. I work with companies that deal everywhere from New Zealand, a guy that's at this 25 years, all the way to Switzerland that are at this for 30 years. And a UK company that are doing this for probably 20 years. So they develop products that can be used in a practical scenario. Like, for example, we've got one microbial mix there that can be mixed with, in a conventional farm, can be mixed with herbicides, pesticides, fungicides at any pressure within reason. So any pressure, any normal working pressure, they can withstand and they live. And they only basically start to germinate and grow when they make their way to the soil. So in our own context, the majority of products we work with, the spray pressures and Irish conditions are perfectly fine.
Yeah, that's perfect.
But
Thanks.
it's always good to check, Fergal. It's always good to check. There is some products out there that are live, and fungal products particularly, where high pressures, once you go over 30 psi, they do kill fungal predominantly. Now, I didn't get into tonight because I could go on the whole night, but like if you're looking at making your own high quality compost, taking compost tea extracts, or making compost, extracts or even teas themselves, pressure then with the likes of them, because they're live bacteria, they're live fungi, pressure has a big bearing on them. They generally need to be 2 bar and under, and 3 bar 30 psi is the absolute max. Like the machine that we have from New Zealand operates at about 20 psi very, very well. That's its ideal operating pressure, and that is to basically accommodate the application of biologicals as well as foliar fertilizers.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks a million, Leslie. Brilliant.
But like most simple sprayers will apply. It doesn't take a very fancy sprayer. Most simple sprayers, and they're actually quite they can be acquired relatively inexpensively because of the TAMS grants. A lot of machines have been traded in, and there is a lot of second-hand machines on the market, and they can be acquired, and they are an excellent investment for any livestock farmer, because there is a lot that can be done to improve soil health with a sprayer that cannot be done with a granular spreader.
Yeah, thanks a million. Thanks again, Leslie.
Okay, thank you, Fergal. If that's it, guys, we'll wrap it up. If you have any queries, questions, you can contact me on by email or on the mobile. And thank you all for your time, and hopefully speak to you soon.